Hey friends, and welcome to this week's episode of the U-Turn Podcast. This is your host, Ashley Stahl. I'm a counterterrorism professional turned career coach, speaker, and Forbes blogger, and I created the U-Turn Podcast because, let's face it, every now and again we realize that we're living life on autopilot and it's time to wake up and make that U-turn in your life. So prepare to go deep with some of the most transformational people I know, here to help you grow and upgrade your mindset, whether it's in work or love. Also, be sure to stick around for the end of every episode where I'm going to reflect on the conversation and offer actionable coaching insights to have a real impact on your life. In the meantime, we've opened up access to 3 free e-courses on uturnpodcast.com. So head on over there if you want to land a new job you love, find your purpose, or launch your dream business. All of these courses are totally free. All you got to do is head on over to uturnpodcast.com. That's YOUTURN podcast.com. Now let's get started with this week's guest.
It's not our job to anticipate what someone else's response is going to be. It's just our job to, as you were saying, tune in, really see what the desires are, because a lot of times we're not aware of them. No one's really taught us how to do this for the most part.
Hey U-Turners, it's Ash here. Of course, another week on the U-Turn Podcast, and I've got to admit, this is slowly becoming my favorite category, which is so weird being a career coach, but we have another week on the love category with Evin Littman. She's a dating and love life coach, and I figured she'd be an incredible person for us to really set the standard of what do you really want in your love life and how do you ask for it. So she helps a lot of single women with their dating lives. But I think that this is going to apply to anybody. If you're in a relationship that's not working, you want to ask for what you want, or you want to really dig deep within yourself and realize if it's working for you or not. So, Evin, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to dive into this with you.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to find that I'm slowly going to be asking you all sorts of questions about my own love life. So buckle up and put your helmet on. Yeah. So I'm curious, what got you so curious about this kind of work? Because I always find that people in the love category especially are drawn to this work through their own pain usually. So talk to me, what got you interested in doing this?
Yeah, I mean, my love life has always been perfect, so I actually didn't have to deal with that. I'm just kidding. Yeah, totally. It absolutely was my own struggles, my own years of really frustrated dating, really feeling disempowered in my own love life, feeling like I had this deep desire for partnership and connection and intimacy and to be seen. But then the way I was showing up was with so much fear, and I just felt like I was not in the driver's seat of my own love life. I was able to take so much empowered action in my career, and I was cultivating great friendships and had all of these other kind of life boxes checked. And then year after year, I just felt totally stuck and repeating old patterns and, ending up in these, what I call situationships and really feeling deeply unfulfilled. So I, of course, just got curious and got on the path of how do I level up for myself. And at the same time, I was getting certified as a life coach, and just kind of all unfolded so beautifully that it became really clear to me this is my passion and my purpose, to be able to share what I've been learning and inspire other women along the journey.
I love it. And it's so interesting because I consider myself empowered like you are. I'm oh, my career, I'm creative, I'm excited. But for a really long time before I got into the relationship I'm in now, I was totally saying I wanted something, but putting up with something else. And I'll never forget on the episode with Evan Mark Katz. Do you know who he is? The dating coach?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He said to us, you don't get what you attract, you get what you put up with. And that never left me. Because I think in the spiritual world, there's a lot of bypassing of I keep attracting this. And it's so I'm curious for women who are kind of like I used to be, where it's like they're empowered in their career, but they're not in their love life. Like, what is that about? Like, what drives that level of settling when we are pushing and thriving in so many other areas, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's really well said. The attraction, when we just talk about who we're attracting, which I do believe in, and I believe in our frequency and all of that, but we really give up some of the personal responsibility when we just talk about attracting. It feels very passive versus really looking at who we're choosing, who we're choosing to continue engaging with. Like, you're a year in with this person who isn't treating you how you want to be treated, or isn't giving you commitment, or isn't consistent with you. And we're like, why did I attract him? And it's like, why are you still in it? Right? Yeah. Why are you tolerating that? So I think at our core, it always is going to come down to our sense of our own worthiness and what we really believe we deserve, right? If we're crystal clear that we deserve better, that we are worthy no matter what, right? No matter that we're imperfect, no matter what our weight is on any given day, no matter all of the other, arbitrary external factors that our society tells us dictate our worthiness. If we really believe at our core that we're worthy, that we're deserving, that our desires are valid, we won't tolerate less, right? We won't. Yeah.
Yeah. I honestly, that was such a big sneeze. I feel like a new person. Like, I actually want to challenge this, and I've never challenged it before, and only because of myself. Like, I don't know if it's my ego wanting to think, I already think I'm worthy. I've thought that the whole time, or what. Mm-hmm. But there's a part of me that it's kind of like when you're at the nail salon and they offer you the 5-minute massage and you don't have time for the 60-minute, or like, it kind of feels like, well, something feels better than nothing. So I think even though you could look at it and say worthiness, what if it's like the woman feels like she's winning? Like, well, I enjoy this connection for what it is, even though it's causing me some sort of pain, or it's occupying a space in my life that should probably be free for the right person. Like, does it always have to be about worthiness, or can it be like there's an empowered woman that's like, yeah, this guy isn't that great, but I'm doing this because I enjoy the connection we have? And is there an empowerment in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We don't all need to want, only a certain type of committed romantic partnership at any given time, right? We can absolutely, from an empowered place, choose to have a casual relationship, choose to have a sexual relationship, choose to have something that's open. Like, all of that is valid. That absolutely is part of being empowered, is saying it's actually not about other people's judgments of my situation or of my relationship. It's what I truly want. So if that's what you want and it feels good and it feels like you are actively choosing, and choosing from a place of desire, not fear, I think that's really the big shift. Is there can be fear can really mess with our heads, where we can sometimes, not saying all the time, sometimes we can convince ourselves this really does feel good enough. Like, this is worth it to me to be in this. And if we look a little bit deeper, the fear might be, I don't actually know if there's something better out there for me, or if I'll be able to find it, or if I'll be able to keep it if I do find it. Right? Or maybe there's another fear. Maybe the fear is like, I have a lot of women, a lot of clients who are, have incredible careers and work lives and businesses. And sometimes our fear is, if I have a committed partnership, maybe that will take away from maybe that will disempower me in my career. Maybe I can't have it all.
Right.
So, right. All these underlying fears that sometimes keep us in something that is, quote unquote, good enough, or filling a void. We're getting something out of it, but isn't ultimately the thing that we most deeply desire.
Okay. And kind of looking at all the situationships that people are in. I'm like so into that word right now. I used to call it relationships. Like,
oh, I love it.
But I'm kind of curious to understand from your standpoint, like, what are some common situationships or situationships? Let's just really combine our powers here. Like, what are some of the areas that you consistently see women settling. And I'm guessing the belief is that they can't get better. And that's kind of where the worthiness thing comes, where sometimes I don't think women are thinking they can't get better because they're not worthy. Sometimes I think they can't get better because they're in like scarcity. Like there's not somebody as great as them out there. Like maybe they think I am so worthy and there's just not a lot of men out there. So there's like different limiting beliefs that keep you from finding your guy or your girl or whatever your sexuality is. But I'm kind of curious, what are the most common situations that you see women settling in, even though there's always a weird situationship that works for somebody else that maybe they don't think it's settling? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Well, first of all, I think that's a really good point, those limiting beliefs around, maybe there's not someone as amazing as me. Maybe my standards are too high, the one I hear a lot. Am I just too picky? All the good ones are taken by this point. All the things, right? It took me 5 years to actually find this one person I really like. It would be another 5. All these things we make up. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that. The common situationships, I just see a lot of it. First of all, I define a situationship as it's more than a booty call, less than a committed relationship.
Oh, I've totally been in one of those. It's so painful.
A million of those. Yeah. So it can feel like, you're like, but we get dinner sometimes, or like he texts me or whatever. Like it's not just a late night thing. So that keeps us feeling, maybe we feel more attached because of that. Maybe we feel like it's filling more of that intimacy that we're craving because of that. But ultimately that person isn't either, these are kind of the common things, isn't either willing to make a commitment. So maybe it's actually fulfilling everything that you want in a relationship, except this person is saying, I don't want commitment. Mm-hmm. I don't want exclusivity, or I don't want a label, or, I'm not ultimately interested in marriage and children if that's something that you want. Right.
What's that really about when like men want all of this connection, or even women, but they don't want commitment? Like what is under someone who isn't, sometimes it's fear, but what else is that about?
Yeah, I think fear plays a huge role, and kind of like we were talking about, it can be some sneaky fears. Like it's not always the obvious, just very vague fear of commitment. It can be fear of losing my autonomy, fear of, especially if you look at attachment styles, right? So people who have an avoidant attachment style, for example, without kind of getting too far into the research, are still crave intimacy, still crave connection. We all do at some level. We're wired biologically for that. But there can also be a lot of fear around, if I fully lean in to this partnership, will I lose myself? Will I lose my independence? Will I lose my autonomy, my freedom? Right? Fear of codependence. It could come from our relationship history. Like maybe you've been in partnerships that weren't really healthy, or where maybe it's a fear that you don't know how to set your own boundaries, right? So you kind of keep people at arm's length. It feels safer to not have the commitment. Maybe it's a fear that you're going to let this person down, that you actually can't be the partner you think that they want or need. And then there's, on the flip side, it's also valid, I want to say, because there might be someone listening to this being like, I'm actually not afraid. I just, at this point in my life, don't want it, or that's not a priority to me. And that's valid. That's totally valid. We need to hear people when they tell us that.
That's so interesting. And I'm also really curious to understand from your standpoint, when somebody doesn't want commitment, I always hear dating coaches, and by the way, those of you who are into attachment styles, we have an episode on that with Nora DeKaiser, so you can find that one. But I'm kind of curious, just why do people who don't want commitment act like they're in a committed relationship? Like, because now it's just a label issue. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what is that?
Oh, it's such a frustrating one. It's so frustrating.
I can't help it. I just don't get it at this point.
I know. Well, it's really tough. I mean, if you've ever been, and I certainly have on that side of it, it's crazy making, because you're like, we're like, you're acting like you're my partner. And yet there's this hang up around the label or around, whatever that next step is. And I think we always have to, if we're willing to be introspective and to ask ourselves, okay, what is it that I'm attaching to that label? Like, what are my associations with that? Mm-hmm. What have I heaped onto that? Mm-hmm. And again, maybe it's like, well, the last time that I committed to someone, here's how it's turned out. So we've like made this link in our brains that's like, me being a boyfriend equals me cheating or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like, it's not actually about the label, because it's just, at some point it's semantics. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When we have all the elements of the relationship already.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I know a lot of people listening right now, whether they're single or they're in a relationship, people struggle to ask for what they want. And in my case, I was afraid to ask for what I wanted at one point in my life because I was scared I would lose the person. Mm-hmm. And so instead I decided, why not just totally lose myself and keep the person?
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm curious to learn from you, for anybody listening right now. I'm guessing that as they're hearing our voices, they're tuning into something in their heart that they really wish they had, whether it's in a dating situation, in a romantic relationship they're already in. And maybe they're accustomed to not even tuning into what they want. And because we're talking about it, they're starting to think, well, I actually wish my partner would do this. And maybe it's as simple as like, I want you to get me flowers. And sometimes people need to be asked, for what you really want. But other times it's as deep as, hey, I need you to like reconsider how you're being with me. Mm-hmm. And so what are some things that you think are so worth people who are listening right now considering asking for, even though everybody's different?
I think it's all worth asking for. I think our desires are valid across the board. What really is heartbreaking to me, and of course, in part because I can identify with this so much as being my own experience in the past as well, is when clients or women in my community say to me, like, it is this, but maybe that's too much to ask. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be too difficult, or we anticipate that person, that would be too much for them, or that we'd be crossing a boundary of theirs. And it's like, it's not our job to anticipate what someone else's response is going to be. Mm-hmm. It's just our job to, as you were saying, tune in, really see what the desires are, because a lot of times we're not aware of them. No one's really taught us how to do this for the most part. And then we really have to start by just validating our desires, by saying to ourselves, my desire isn't wrong. My desire isn't wrong. That doesn't mean you're going to get it, by the way. And that doesn't mean it's wrong for someone else to say, actually, I'm not available for that. But our actual desire is never wrong.
Okay, but also like down to the worthiness debate, like at what point is somebody maybe asking too much? Like maybe somebody has this like big audacious dream for their love life and it's just not realistic. Is that a thing?
It's definitely a thing. I mean, that's the fine line of the danger of us thinking that our partner is supposed to be everything for us and fulfill every need of ours, right? That our partner is supposed to be our emotional support, our therapist, our best friend, our adventure buddy, the best sex we've ever had, our number one cheerleader. Like, we definitely, it is possible that we put too much on our partners. And one kind of way to check in with that is just to ask ourselves, when we think through all of those things that we need, because those needs are still valid, to want to feel supported, to want to feel, right, like you have outlets for all of those needs. We just want to think about, do I have, who else in my community am I calling on, right? Am I really cultivating a tribe for myself that feels like I'm supported and surrounded, and that I can, reach out to a girlfriend or a parent or a therapist or my hairdresser or whoever to help me talk some things out, or to be a listening ear, or whatever that is, so that we're not making our partner responsible for everything that we need.
And kind of when it comes to asking for what you want in love, like your first step being decide you're worthy. I'm curious, like, what was that moment for you? And what does that look like for your clients who have been operating out of a paradigm that isn't working for them? Like, how do they kind of reach within themselves? Like, is it about getting to that moment where you're like, I've had enough and I can't do it anymore? Or what does it look like when somebody is able to really decide that?
Yeah, I think usually you're right. There is a breaking point. It tends to be either after we have been in something that's really unfulfilling, where if we're real with ourselves, we feel like we've been accepting crumbs for months and months or years and years. Mm-hmm. And we get to that point where it's just, we're just fed up. We just can't, it's not sustainable anymore. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's after the point where I have a lot of women reach out to me who are like, my love life has been non-existent for 3 years. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And I've had this fear of putting myself out there. And I realize that because of that, I'm the reason that I'm not creating the possibility of me getting what I want. Right. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's a relationship ending. Sometimes it takes a relationship ending. I know that I was in a relationship where it's so hard when we're in the moment to even be aware of what's coming up for us. Like at the time I would have said like, yeah, I totally feel worthy and I'm asking for what I need. And it was only in looking back that I was like, oh no, I actually was still dimming down my needs and overly accommodating and bending over backwards to try to be easy for him so that this could work and he would stay. Right. And it wasn't until the relationship ended and I processed and healed from it, was really with myself, that I was able to see, no, like that's never going to work. It is never going. We are never going to create a healthy, loving, mutually fulfilling partnership when one of us or both of us are hiding what we really need, what we really want.
You know, that's the thing is like who you are always wins. It's like, mm-hmm. It reminds me of, and that's a chapter title in my book I'm writing. It's like,
oh, yes.
Yeah, because I remember being like 6 years old and it's totally different, but it's all the same. And I hated sleepover parties because I was always uncomfortable and there's always girls who would stay up later than me and I couldn't sleep because I'm a light sleeper. Mm-hmm. So I always knew myself deep down, even as like a 6-year-old. I knew that when I said yes to a slumber party, I wasn't going to cut it through. And inevitably, every time 3 a.m, I'd be calling my mom, asking her to pick me up, waking up the kids' parents to be like, I need to call my mom. Because it's like who I was always won. I already knew that this was for, like that I wasn't going to be able to hack that because that was just the limit for me. And so it's like, even since age 6, I have memories of like knowing that something was not going to work for me and not stepping in until I was miserable. So how do we help everybody listen to that whisper inside of them oh, I actually need that? And what do you have to say about living in a world where growth sometimes is like advertised as a lot of pain to the point where people think, well, that's why this is such a powerful relationship because you can't always get what you want. And I'm growing so much through that. Do you know what I mean? I'm going to die. Like, I can't hear that
know what
anymore.
You mean. Yeah. I so know what you mean. It's a really fine line. I mean, it's pretty gray. I've had this conversation recently with some girlfriends who are all coaches and we're like, yeah, we think about this a lot because for sure we want to, in order to grow, we have to put ourselves in situations that feel beyond our comfort zones. Mm-hmm. and that trigger us in some ways and challenge us in some ways and invite us to look at what's my edge and how do I have a powerful breakthrough around this? And we also need to be really conscious of our own boundaries and what actually feels healthy for us and what feels, I think the word here for me is self-honoring. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, it feels self-honoring for me to put myself in, a situation that is a little anxiety producing for me because it's outside my comfort zone or because I have an old wound around this, but I also really have desire here and I feel safe. Mm-hmm. Versus it actually doesn't feel safe for me to participate in a in a situation with someone, date someone or see someone who isn't willing to show up consistently for me, or who, if I'm expressing something that I need, or a feeling, or like something that felt bad for me, and I'm asking for a request for them to make an adjustment. Like if they tell me that you're crazy,
mm-hmm.
right? Or something like that, and I get triggered by that because of my past, I'm not going to be like, I'll just keep subjecting myself to that because there's growth in feeling triggered and no,
mm-hmm.
that's not healthy for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's not a safe person for me to be in relationship with.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel self-honoring for me to stay in that dynamic or to dishonor that boundary of mine.
Hey U-Turners, so sorry for the quick interruption, but I want to make sure you know that this episode has been brought to you by the Job Offer Academy, our e-course to help you land a new job you love. So if you're sick of applying for jobs and never hearing back, and you'd like to try a free version of our job hunting course, just head on over to youturnpodcast.com/job offer. That's YOUTURN podcast.com/job offer. Now let's get back to this week's episode. And so many people don't fully know themselves because that's what life is getting to know yourself. So it's like we kind of learn what we want sometimes by not getting what we want.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious right now for the people listening who are kind of even struggling to figure out what they want from a partner, but they're not happy. Do you have any exercises or something that somebody can do right now after this that maybe can bring them back home into their heart and help them really find their voice?
Yeah, I have two ideas for you. So one would be, it can be really helpful to look back at our past relationships, past dating situations, because like I was saying, we have so much more perspective looking back than we do when we're in the moment. Mm-hmm. So to look back and to actually write down, here are places where I felt, here are behaviors or places where I felt triggered, mm-hmm. right? Meaning where I felt, that produced anxiety for me, where I felt really hurt, that really pissed me off or annoyed me with someone. And then you kind of go through this exercise where you write down, okay, what was the thought I had when that person did that? When people cancel on me at the last minute, like that triggers this thought in me that I don't matter to them, that I'm not safe with them. What's the fear at the root of that?
Mm-hmm.
What do I need? Like, what if I could go back in time? What's the request that I have for that person?
Mm.
Oh, right. And that might mean, saying to someone, I really need to know that you're going to show up when we make plans because here's how it feels for me, right? We have to express ourselves more vulnerably than we probably like to in order to really get through to people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're running late, I totally understand. Or like if an emergency comes up, I get that life happens. In that case, here's what I would need to feel safe is like for you to just give me a call as soon as you know and let me know, and for you to, offer to reschedule. Mm-hmm. So that I'm not having to wonder or chase you, whatever it is. Right. So we kind of look back, or we're like, when I have been with someone when I'm sleeping with someone who isn't willing to, be upfront about whether or not they're sleeping with other people. Mm-hmm. Like that actually doesn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So getting clear on what has not worked for you, what has not felt good in the past, what's the request? What do you actually need in those situations to feel safe?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's so helpful. And, I always tell people, like, you sometimes learn what your core values are when they've been violated.
Yes.
And some people think, oh, I'm triggered, like my nervous system's going insane. I need to work on myself. Yes, sometimes that's true. But sometimes it's like, okay, if you're losing your mind right now, maybe there's a core value that's really important and you hold high that you're not aware of. That's really the problem. So it's like taking a look at when you're upset, like what is that core value? Like, is it your safety? Is it balance? Is it connection? Like, what do you really wish was happening that just got crossed? So helpful. Okay. And then the second step after deciding you're worthy was setting boundaries and standards. I remember you saying this before we started recording. So I'm curious, what does setting boundaries and standards really mean? And the word boundary, I think it's really interesting, and I want to talk after the episode about barriers, because sometimes people think a boundary is putting a wall up, and I think there's such a big difference between boundaries and barriers. You know what I mean? Like shutting off and asking for what you want. So how can someone start to think about how they can set a boundary and what boundary to set?
Yeah, absolutely. So I completely agree with you. Boundaries are not walls. Boundaries are just the standard for behavior, the standard for treatment that feels okay or not okay for us. Right? So we can, the first thing I'd say, one other quick little exercise I just want to give to anyone listening is if you're in something right now also where you're just not sure, you're like, what do I actually want or what do I actually need here? I would invite you to ask yourself, if I had no fear of how this person would respond, right? Or if I knew that I could have things how I wanted them, what would I want? So we take the element of like, where we're so tempted to dim ourselves down and to say like, but that might be too much, or, but I don't think he'd go for that, or I don't want to scare him off. If we took that out of it just for the sake of the exercise, and you can really write down, I would want to see him, 3 times a week. I would want him to spend the night every time we sleep together. I would want to, I would want to get a little check-in text every day. I would want for him to meet my friends, right? Like really being honest with yourself. If you could have whatever you wanted, that's a great place to start.
I love that. I love when we remove limitations in our mind and then we come up with such better ideas.
Right.
It's like,
yeah.
Okay.
I'm always asking clients like, okay, what else? What else? Is that really what you want, or is that just like fine? Yeah. What do you really want?
Yeah. Okay. This is helpful. And boundaries.
Yeah.
What does that even, I mean, I'm in a really good relationship right now and I feel like I'm getting what I want, but it's almost like this conversation is making me be like, but am I? I think I am. So what's the fine line of like optimizing your relationship and just kind of like nitpicking? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Because there is always more. And like, that's part of the fun is being like, oh, what new desire do I have right now? Or what am I craving this week or this month? And that doesn't mean that you need to have more in every single moment in order for your relationship to be awesome and fulfilling. Like there is the balance of at some point we have to let ourselves just enjoy the relationship. It can't always be work.
Yeah.
It can't always be like, well, what's next? What else can we be? We actually, sabotage our own enjoyment of the experience. So yeah, I think like you were saying earlier, it's easiest to identify our boundaries when a boundary feels like it's being violated or neglected, right? So that might look like, I have a client who spends so much time with her significant other and they really love each other, a healthy relationship. And she's realizing that she feels either drained or resentful or just that she's not able to show up as her best self in the partnership when she isn't taking enough time for herself, alone time. Right? Self-care time with girlfriends, whatever that looks like for her. She's needing to reevaluate what's a boundary that I need to set here and really voice to my partner to say, hey, I love you and this is not about you, but I really need to have Sundays to myself, like full self-care day, right? Or I need to have 2 nights a week where it's just the expectation that we're not going to make plans. Boundaries sometimes they're not just things we're saying no to either. Like I was saying, there's standards of how we want to be treated. So sometimes it's something else that we need from someone. It's like, I had a client who was in a situationship where, the guy she was seeing, it felt too intimate for him to to sleep in the same bed after they'd had sex. So they would like sleep together, be intimate, and then sleep separately. And that actually didn't feel okay to her.
Yeah. That feels weird.
It's valid. Right. But she didn't even like, she had really convinced herself, okay, well, that's his need, or like, that's his boundary. And sure, that's what I'm saying about we can't, when we voice a need or we voice a desire or a boundary. And if she back then were to say to him, this actually doesn't work for me, in order for me to have a, safe feeling, juicy physical relationship with you, I need to know that we're going to spend the night together. I need to be held after. I need to share a bed, or whatever that looks like. He gets to say, actually, that doesn't work for me. This is my boundary. Mm-hmm. And that would be a moment of discovery that those needs are incompatible. Mm-hmm. And that's why it feels so risky for us to voice, to speak our truth, to ask for something, because there is always the possibility that person is going to say, actually, that doesn't work. I can't do that. Mm-hmm. And then we get to do the dance of, okay, is there some middle ground? Is there some room to compromise here so that we can both feel good? Because two humans in a relationship are never going to have identical needs and preferences and boundaries and all of that, or is this actually a conflict where we're not both able to feel safe and fulfilled and loved and get what we need together because we're just not a great fit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like everybody has their boundary, and then everybody has a response to a boundary. Does it work? Does it not? And it's like, I've never trusted a relationship of two people that aren't willing to risk their relationship, for what they want.
Yeah.
And I think so many people are afraid to risk the relationship when it's like the relationship's already over if you're afraid to risk it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And we're, every time you said something earlier that made me think of this, like every time we are honoring someone else's, trying so hard to make someone else comfortable or make someone else happy and putting their needs before our own, we're dishonoring, we're abandoning ourselves. That's how we end up losing ourselves in a relationship.
Yeah.
Then it's like, great, you find yourself a few years in and you still, quote unquote, have this person, but you don't have yourself. You're not really available.
Yeah.
To be fully seen and loved and to fully participate in that experience. So totally, it's really, that was a really tough realization for me after years of realizing that that's kind of how I was operating. It was like, do everything I can to make him happy, and then I get to have him. And then it's like, well, where am I in this equation?
Yeah, totally. And do you have any communication tools for somebody that is taking that step right now and they're like, you know what, I'm going to set a boundary? Because the thought of, I found that working in information all these years now, it's like, or the business of information, it's like one of the biggest struggles I see people having is how to start a conversation or how to step into a conversation. So do you have any tools for anybody right now that is like, you know what, this is a problem for me? How do they start expressing that?
Yeah, totally. So, step one would be asking the person, getting their consent to have this conversation, right? So you're like, hey, I actually am really wanting to talk about XYZ. Do you have 15 minutes right now for us to chat about this? Or is there a better time for us to connect? So rather than kind of springing it on someone and just launching into it, because you want to make sure that person is actually available, not distracted, not buried in work, right?
Yeah.
To have this connection. The second thing I would say, this is one of my favorite tools, is if you're feeling really nervous, uncomfortable, afraid, whatever it is to bring it up, actually voice that. Like, let the person see you in that vulnerable spot, right? So you can lead into the conversation by saying, oh, I don't know why, but I'm feeling really nervous to express this to you because, I don't want you to feel, like, let's say this is someone who is actually treating us well and who cares about us. And it's just, there's something that isn't feeling good that we haven't voiced yet. Right. So we're like, I'm feeling nervous to bring this up because I really don't want you to think that I don't appreciate you, or yeah, it's just scary for me to like ask for something because I've been with people in the past who weren't receptive to that. So, but I'm practicing, right? Like I want to share this with you. And what's the intention? Like I want to share this with you so that we can actually deepen our relationship and both feel even better moving forward. Mm-hmm. Right? So the intention, whenever you share a need, a desire, a boundary with someone, it's such a gift to that person and to the potential of the relationship.
Mm-hmm. And I think also it's an immediate diffuser when you tell somebody like, this is challenging for me.
Yeah.
Because people like will tread softer when they understand that you're extending yourself for the relationship, you know?
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, great. And so let's say the boundary is like, I want to spend more time with my friends, or the boundary is, I feel like I'm giving too much and I want you to start like paying for dinner. Like, let's talk about money. Like, what if somebody feels like they're paying for things all the time and they want that feels like so loaded. It's like you're asking for a boundary and it's money. So how can somebody navigate? Like, can you give us an example of how that would sound ideally?
Yeah, totally. So, again, I would start by saying like, oh, this feels really sensitive to me to bring up because, it feels really loaded because we're talking about money. Like I would name all of that. Yeah. Right. So that you're not having to dance around it. We can actually just be humans and be like, oh, this feels so awkward. And the last thing I want is for you to feel like, X, Y, Z, whatever the fear is, whatever the worry is, that when you bring this up, it's going to, how that person's going to respond. And then I would say, so let's say the situation is that I'm paying for more, and maybe it's because I'm making more, right? Maybe like I have more of a budget to spend on meals out, vacations, or whatever. Yeah. Right. So I'm like, you start with something that's positive in your partnership, right? You're like, I love that you are like up for having these adventures with me and going to nice restaurants. And I'm actually comfortable with the fact that just given our financial situations right now, that this is something I have more of a budget for, that I'm happy to spend more on XYZ. I also realize here's where we can take responsibility too. I realize that I haven't voiced this to you before, right? Like I realize that I've been withholding sharing this concern or voicing this. So that's where we take responsibility. And then we say, the tough thing for me, right? Like, here's how it feels for me. I'm realizing that as I'm the person who is, consistently picking up the bill on these things, it starts to feel to me like and then whatever the thing is, like that I'm not getting taken care of the way that I want to be, or I find myself feeling a little bit resentful, or like I'm like taking advantage of, right? So really naming, like, what is that bringing up for you? And then name the desire. So we always want to come to these conversations with essentially the solution, like what we want, the positive thing, like what would feel so good to me, what I would really love is and here's the solution. Maybe it's, if once a week, you would plan the date. It doesn't have to be an expensive place. Like I actually love to go to like a divey bar or, some casual place. Doesn't have to break the bank, but for you to actually plan the date, make the reservation, pick me up and pick up the bill so that I get to feel fully taken care of on those nights. That would feel so good to me to receive.
Okay. Can you repeat those steps for everybody taking notes? Like you don't have to go into the details, but like the first one, go ahead to ask.
Yeah. So step one would be let them see your vulnerability or like the discomfort of bringing this up for you, if that's true. Getting their consent to have the conversation, like making sure they're truly available for the conversation at that time. Starting with a positive about them or the relationship, like acknowledging something positive. Taking responsibility for your part in this issue and maybe that's just that you haven't brought it up because you felt too awkward or you've been avoiding the conversation, taking responsibility for that because it's actually not fair to them, right? Saying, my goal with this conversation is for us to both XYZ feel really good at the end of it, bring us closer together, deepen our relationship, deepen our intimacy, right? How it's really serving both of you. Name the scary thing to name. Like, when this happens, here's how it feels for me.
Great.
And then name the request, the desire, the potential solution.
And I loved how you said, I would just like so love to receive that. I think that's such beautiful communication when you just say, this is what I would love. Because everybody wants to give you what you would love. It's just like placing a really good dessert order. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I would just love some chocolate cake. And if you could give me that, I would just love to receive it. It's a beautiful way to communicate, I think.
Yeah, it feels so good to someone to know how to provide for you, so they don't have to guess or read your mind, or like, because if you just leave it at like, here's what's not working, that person's going to be like, you know, using this example, oh my gosh, like, I can't afford to suddenly pick up all the bills or take her to these fancy restaurants or whatever. So you're actually just giving them really specific, and this is important with all communication, especially around conflict, really specific requests of here's what I need, here's what would feel so good. And then the final step is you want to ask them, what do you think, right? Does that feel doable for you? How does that feel for you? And then you sit back and you give them space to share, to be heard, to be seen.
Great. I love when you say, what do you think about that chocolate cake?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then kind of going back to our steps to ask for what you want. So those are like the micro steps of like how you set your boundaries. So the first thing is deciding you're worthy. Maybe somebody listening is like, you know what, now that, and you know, I was kind of asking you like, what if it's not about worthiness, but a lot of people have that. So maybe they're deciding now I'm worthy. And then it's about setting boundaries. They don't know what boundaries to set. And then they kind of reflect, like we were talking about, on moments that they didn't get what they wanted and how they felt. And then they can kind of find that desire in that moment. And then they follow these micro steps. They're going to go ask their person for them. So that's like how to ask for the scary things. That's the emotional bravery, which was your third step. And then follow through. Follow through can be so challenging. I'm so curious what feedback you have for anybody listening right now that might struggle to follow through on this. Like, I feel like, you know, it's like exercise. I just joined a gym and it's like, God bless the fact that I went 4 times in a row. I was so motivated, and here I am avoiding it right now on this podcast.
Yeah. Follow through is tricky. I mean, one thing I'll say, this isn't really part of the step, but I'm just going to throw this in, is having community, whether that's just like a couple close girlfriends, whether that's actually being part of a program or something where you have people who are seeing you in what you want and seeing you through this whole process, who are able to check in with you and be right to help you feel supported, accountable, whatever that is, rather than doing this in isolation, I think is really, really important.
Great.
Yeah. And then, you know, I would say, listen, there's a difference between if you set a boundary or you ask for something that's like, where someone was not treating you well, or where, like, let's say you ask someone for, I'm going to go back to the example with my client, like for someone to spend the night with you after having sex. And you're like, that's a hard boundary. Like, that needs to happen. And you voice that to the person and they are like, either flat out say, no, I can't do that, I'm not here for that. Or they're like, yeah. And then they make excuses the next 3 times and leave. The follow through on that is probably going to look, it's probably pretty cut and dry, right? It's like, if that's actually a need of yours and you want to honor yourself and you want to make sure that you are in something that feels really healthy for you, you're going to want to follow through on ending that relationship, or at least changing the terms of that relationship. Mm-hmm. And I know that's not easy, and that can take time, and there's no judgment around like doing it the next day. You know, I've certainly stayed in things well beyond knowing that it didn't feel totally self-honoring. But, you know, that's what follow through could look like there. Versus if it's something like our example about you're in this healthy, loving partnership and you're expressing a need or a desire, which, yeah. So if we're talking about an example where you're in this loving, committed partnership and you're voicing, a need or a desire or a boundary, which is going to happen always. Like that is part of healthy partnerships, right? The follow through around that might look like, okay, that person has said, I hear you and I'll try to do that. And then we actually need to be willing to not have that be a one and done conversation. We're probably going to have to remind that person. It's probably going to be an ongoing conversation, right? Of like positively reinforcing when we see that they're putting an effort on that thing, letting them know in the moment if something isn't feeling great, reminding them like, oh, hey babe, like here's where here's where I'd voice the boundary of like, when I get home from a crazy work day, I actually really need to take 30 minutes to myself to decompress before we catch up. And then, you come home and that person is like, be with me. And we might have to follow through on, rather than just giving in or being like, oh, they didn't listen. We're always teaching people how to treat us. We're always training them. So reminding them, being like, hey babe, just reminding you, here's where I asked for this 30 minutes. So I'm actually going to go
do it,
take a walk or sit in this room, and then I'll reconnect with you at 6:30.
Love it. Okay. This has been so helpful. And for those of you who have been taking notes, the 4 key steps are: decide you're worthy, set your boundaries, ask for the scary things, and follow through. And setting boundaries also is about setting your standards. So we kind of went through the steps of asking for the scary things and the follow through. Evin, this has been so helpful. I know a lot of people are going to be using it. Where can everybody find you?
Yeah, I am Evin, Evin Rose, pretty much everywhere. So at Evin Rose on Instagram is where I hang out most of the time. I have a private Facebook community for women. So any women out there or female identifying who want to join, that's Empowered Dating with Evin Rose is the Facebook community.
Great.
And you can reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram, or, my website, Evin Rose Coaching, if you're wanting to connect. I'm always happy to.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I am so excited for this to come out, and thanks again for being here.
Yay. Thanks for having me.
Hey there, this is Ashley, founder of AshleyInternational.com and CakePublishing.com, and I was just so inspired to talk to you about inspiration, of course, which is one of my core values and one of my favorite topics. And I found a lot of inspiration in a conversation both with one of my private coaching clients, and this past week I decided to go skiing after avoiding it for 5 years. And the reason I avoided it was because I was in ski school ever since I was a little kid, and my parents put me in ski school. And usually the second half of the day when I was out skiing in Mammoth in California, my whole family, which is like 20 people between the aunts and the uncles and the cousins, we'd all ski together down the slopes. And always it was the case that my uncles, they're adrenaline junkies. They would want to ski down really hard slopes. And I ended up getting really traumatic memories from it because there were a lot of times that I would have to go down slopes that I didn't feel were at my experience level and felt like I was going to fall down the mountain, which sometimes I definitely did. Thank God for helmets. But what I learned was that, first of all, I told my family, I remember the day my parents reminded me, I threw down my poles when I took a really big fall into a heap of snow, and I said, I'm never skiing again. And of course, as one would have it, 5 years later, here I am. I just spent a weekend skiing in Mammoth after avoiding it because somebody wanted to go, and I just felt like, man, you know what? Let me see how this feels. And one of the inspirations that I got from this was really questioning why I step away from things. Do I step away from things because I don't like them or because I'm not good at them? And so that's something for you to kind of look at. Like, is there something you avoid doing in your life? Is it because you don't like it or because you're not good at it? Is there somewhere you want to go in your life? Is there an adventure you want to take in your life, but you're just not doing it because you're not good at it, or because you haven't taken the time to become good at it, or because you just don't want to do it at all? So what I found when I was skiing was that the person I was with, he said to me,
if I were you, I would master this. And I said, well, why? What's in it for me to master skiing? Like, it's not something I do all the time. And he said, well, I try to master everything I do. And in talking to him, I realized mastery was his core value. That was his primary motivation. He is motivated by the concept of being a master and mastering what he's doing. I, on the other hand, am motivated by inspiration. I'm never motivated by mastery. So if somebody comes up to me and says, you're going to be the best whatever in the world, I'm not really motivated by that. But if somebody says, you are going to be so inspired and this is going to move you and you're going to be so connected to this, I am totally motivated. So what I did was I created a vision for myself around skiing, and I was inspired not to become a master at skiing, but I was inspired to overcome this feeling of giving up when I'm not good at something. And I've leaned into taking ski lessons and doing all these things because I've just noticed how much skiing has been something that I've run from because I'm scared that I'm not good at something. I'm not going to look good. I'm going to look wobbly, which I definitely look. And that vision of really rising into a higher version of myself, someone who's more fearless, really inspires me. So I want to invite you now to really think about your own inspiration. In my case, I get really inspired to write when I am in rainy cities. I know that about myself. There's certain music I listen to that I get inspired by. And so I want to take this moment now to ask you, who inspires you in your life? Is there a person that you feel opens up creative channels in your mind? Or where do you go to feel inspired in your life? Is there a city? Is there a coffee shop? Is there a restaurant? Where do you go? And what can you do to feel more connected to yourself? Because self-connection is so sacred. And for you to not feel connected to yourself, that means that you are going to keep creating results that aren't in alignment with what you really want. I was listening, like I said a while back, to a lecture by Dr. Brene Brown. She talks about how we are the most segmented and sorted society there ever was. And I remember mentioning this to you. She said, more than ever in history, we go to bed and wake up next to people who look just like us from a data standpoint. And yet, despite all of this statistical alignment where we all look the same on paper, we are the most disconnected and lonely generation there's ever been. People are reporting higher levels of loneliness than ever before. And the reason that I think this is happening personally is because we make decisions out of alignment. We do what we think we should do from the mind, and we don't connect to what we want to do from the heart. And I think it always starts and ends with the heart. So the question I want to ask you now is this: where can you go to find inspiration? Who can you spend time with to be inspired? What can you do to get connected to yourself? And I would really invite you, when you're making decisions in your life, especially in your career, to first start with feeling connected to yourself. Ask yourself, am I in my mind or am I in my heart? Because most often it's the case that you are going to make decisions that really line up with who you are when you're coming from your heart. And so with that said, I'm signing off. I'm sending you lots of inspiration, lots of love. And I'm thinking of you. I'd love to hear what you think of this at Ashley Stahl on Instagram, on Twitter. Yeah, I'm just so grateful to be here with you. Take care.
Thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of the U-Turn Podcast. We keep really detailed show notes at uturnpodcast.com. So if our guest mentioned a book or a resource that you're interested in, you'll be able to find that there. In the meantime, if you were inspired by this episode, if it made an impact in your life, we would be so grateful if you subscribed and posted a review for us on iTunes. Rumor has it on the street, the more reviews we get, the more subscribes we get, the more we can grow and get our impact out there in the world. In the meantime, I'd love to hear from you at Ashley Stahl on Instagram. I'm so grateful for connecting, and I look forward to next week's episode.